because I actually don't think I've been on a podcast before that we've gone this deep into concepts and played this deep in that space. And I always love being able to go there because I don't even know sometimes how deep I could go unless someone that I'm with gives the space permission for that part of me to be able to be experienced. So
welcome back to the Lost and Found podcast with me, Sabri, Gazail, and this week I'm joined by Keyen Lare, who was a former football player in the NFL and now is a high-performance coach, sharing esoteric wisdom and guiding people through that journey of doing the inner work to really show up to life as the best possible version of who they are. I absolutely love this episode with Keyen. We're really connected in so many ways after we were introduced on Instagram by a good friend of both of ours, Ashley Kemp. So thank you, Ash, for this introduction. We just kind of meandered through different philosophical ideas, life, and esoteric wisdom. So if that is your bag, then you're in the right place. And for those of you that are familiar with the podcast, you know that is what we love the most here. So I really hope you enjoyed this episode. If you are watching on YouTube, please hit the like button and hit subscribe because it really helps the channel. If you want to find and connect with Keyen, then the links for him are going to be in the show notes, as well as the links for me on Instagram and other places you can get in touch. All right, that's it from me. Enjoy the episode. I guess two meanings. One, it's being on the continual journey of finding myself, which when I first came up with the name of that, I would say even the understanding of that has evolved to really finding a deeper truth, always seeking further into the truth. So finding more of that. And I think many of us have been in a time in our life where we've been lost. And I would say maybe lost from our unique essence of what we are, being lost in that way, being lost from a greater truth. And then on that path of finding it, kind of being lost ourselves, finding ourselves. And then also it would tie in with the idea of lost wisdom and finding new wisdom. And because some of the people I've had on here are have been teachers of like esoteric wisdom and different things of that manner. So I guess lost and found is a double entendre in ways.
I love that. And the concept of finding oneself is such a interesting topic to me. I have, I think, a little bit of a different perspective than the average person in that regard. I think similar to the concept of finding one's purpose, I don't believe in finding one's purpose. I don't think anything is permanent. And I think if I come to an understanding of what I want for myself right now, it should not mean that's what I want 10 years from now. So to me, finding oneself is more of discovering where I'm really at right now. Like, what do I want right now in my life and where am I at? And being able to get really tuned into that and follow whatever that is. Because I think it can get a little confusing when people talk about finding oneself as like an absolute concept. Well, now I found myself, or I don't, I'm still lost, right? I don't like that absolute unique line of, well, now I'm found. I think our brains like to think in terms of that because it makes us feel safer because we can have a more concrete understanding of it. But if you can stay in the tension of just consistently following where your heart is taking you right now in this season of life and forever, perpetually following whatever that is in every preceding season, I think that's the highest level of finding oneself per se, not in the standpoint of a defining moment where now I found myself, from the standpoint of being able to keep up with the changing of the inspirations as the seasons continue to emerge in our lives.
Yeah, I love that. And seeing as we're recording, we may as well just keep flowing. I think it points to the evolutionary nature of our lifetime. And I think, to your point, whenever we think we've found ourselves, maybe at that point I'm actually dead. Because I've kind of killed myself in a way at the point where I think, well, this is me, and not, this is me today, this is me now.
Yeah.
But the wonder and the mystery of who I could be in a week, a month, a year, 5 years.
Yes. Hey, there it is. Yes. The wonder and the mystery. And I think the majority of people are caught in this place of just trying to survive, just trying to discover an element of themselves so they can feel good about themselves and where they're at. But once you move into the world beyond where you're good with where you're at, exists another experience, which is falling in love with the ambiguity and mystery associated with what could happen in life. It's less about finding certainty in where I'm going, but more about seeking out experiences that put me outside of who I've been and take me to a place that I've never known. So I think you have to move out of a place of survival, right? You have to have a certain level of baseline needs covered, and you have to live in a certain way where you feel good about the place you're in and what you're doing to really get to that space in which you're talking about, which is so fucking beautiful, the place of mystery and the unknown, and seeking out experiences that induce that type of experience.
Yeah, it's funny because a lot of people talk about having a fear of the unknown. That's like a real popular notion. Like, oh, it's the fear of the unknown. And something tells me it's not the unknown that anyone's scared of. It's a projected possible known that they don't want to experience. Like being in water, it's not the fear, like in the ocean. It's not the fear of the unknown. It's not. It's the fear of a possible shark.
Ooh, I like that. Yes, 100%. This is fire.
And I just think a lot of people have that thing is like, I'm afraid of the unknown, like the unknown of the future. For a lot of people, it's like, oh, there's fear around that. But if they knew that that unknown also includes all the most amazing possibilities they could imagine, that is also included in the unknown. Yes. Is that something to be scared of?
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense. And the answer is no. The answer is no, but it makes sense why we would operate like that. That's where we talk about being able to go deeper levels into living out of survival and fighting to get to a place where we're less inclined to make decisions from that place of how do I survive right now to how can I be in the most expansive open place to be in a state to receive more and more of what it is that I want. And it's very difficult to do that when your baseline needs haven't been met. So maybe a lot of people listening to this won't resonate or understand what it is that we're talking about because they're just trying to survive. They're just trying to get their bearings underneath them. They're just trying to live a life that they feel somewhat good about, where they're not a slave to the system, but fully living in full alignment with what they want for their lives and what lights them up.
Yeah, I've been playing around with this recently, this thought, because some people say, they'll talk about like certainty. I like to know this. And how much do we really know? I was actually having this conversation with my mom the other day, and she was saying about, she always likes to have like an element of like control of what's going on and like, this element around independence. And I said, I think actually what's happening is that there are a sequence of things in our life that happen which are most probable. And because the most probable thing is happening, we think we have control. Because I assume this is going to happen, and it's only happening because it's the most probable thing to happen. So I believe the most probable takes place, and now I believe I'm in control of my life.
Yes.
And I think, and then something happens which wasn't expected, which wasn't in the probable, and now I think I don't have control. And it feels like the truth is, I mean, how much control do we really have versus just this idea of probable, improbable taking place? And I don't know, there's something kind of liberating in realizing, for some people it might be terrifying to think I actually have very little control, but I think on the other side of that, if you fully go through, there's something quite liberating in like, yes, I've got pretty much no fucking control and I can enjoy it.
Well, but that's also a mechanism of being in control, which is pretty fascinating. Like the concept of being able to acknowledge that you're not in control allows for less of a restriction or squeezing of life, which allows for more space to be able to see the infinite possibility that's already in front of you, right? Because how often do we have all of the opportunities and things right in front of us, but we can't see it because we're not in a state to adequately receive it? So I would also say that mechanism in which you're speaking about, that mental model of operating, of recognizing that I actually don't have a lot of control over what's going on, allows for less of a grip over life and allows for more openness to be able to receive what it is that our humanness, our soul, whatever this is, desires in this season. So it's similar to the concept of I know nothing, right? Was it Aurelius that said that? like one thing I know in life is that I know nothing. I think it was Marcus Aurelius. Maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the great philosophers said that, and it wasn't that he didn't know anything. Okay, he clearly understood a lot of how life worked. That's why people are talking about him hundreds of years later, right? But the concept of saying, hey, I don't know anything creates the openness to be able to receive any information that might be out there that's outside the realm of your comprehension. So it's more of a mechanism to be able to open yourself up to be able to receive more data and information outside of what your brain is currently capable of, which allows you to get more of what your humanness wants in this lifetime.
Yeah, it's what you said about like they're expanding. It's like a lot of people's life is almost like a game of operation, where it's like you've got a very tiny little gap to try and move through, and if you hit either side, and there's very little kind of room for any flux and fluctuation of where life is going, and that idea of expanding and it's realizing that how much of our perception it really is just like I see like there's a habitual set of thoughts, feelings, beliefs and actions that I take daily, and the more I do them, the more narrow it kind of becomes. I almost refine away all the other possibilities, and it kind of does this versus what you just pointed to, which is constantly expanding more to be able to hold more possibility, because really we're infinite, right? We are, I mean, my personal beliefs, we are of the infinite. We are an expression of the infinite. And within that, like, there's all this infinite possibility that we could, be, do, have, become. And it feels like the limitation really does just come down to the limitation of our ability to see expansively.
Yes, 100%. And I love the example you gave. What is it? Is the game called Doctor? Where you have to try to, there's like the guy and he has the little bones, the holes in the bones. You have the little tweezers. You have to try to get into the holes and grab the bone out without touching the side. Isn't that what the game is called?
Yeah, over
Right,
here it's
Doctor?
called Operate. Over here it's called Operation, but it might be called something else there.
No, you're right, Operation. So I think anybody listening to this has probably played the game at one point or another. But there's so much tension in the process of going in and grabbing that little thing with these little tweezers. But what if you could just get beyond the tension and just go, oh, it actually doesn't matter if I touch the sides. Okay. Pick it out. Okay, there we go. So it's just a big facade. The idea that if you touch the side, then it's game over. It's actually not true at all. Right? Yeah. So the better you can get at being able to sit in the tension associated with touching the side and realizing that that loud noise that is made actually doesn't mean shit, then the less stress there is in the process of going and getting that little bone. So then you can actually enjoy it a little more without being paranoid about touching the side. It's just a big facade. Touching the side is a facade. There's nothing that happens. Maybe you fall and you got to pick yourself back up. But in the grand scheme of things, the is actually just more of an annoyance or more of an inconvenience rather than being something that is that terrible.
Yeah, and as you say that, what was coming up then is that actually for progression to take place, you have to be the one who's pushing the boundaries. And that is that, like, are you willing to push the boundaries? Push the boundary. And to be on the edge, if you're the cutting edge, to be on the edge of anything, again, the term on the edge, it's not in the middle, it's on the edge. Yeah. And that feels like it comes with that willingness to push the boundaries and to do that.
Yes, absolutely. And there's always levels to it, right? Like there's always levels to it. So I could sit here and talk about conceptually all this information, and I do my absolute best to be able to do that. But the cool part, I'd say the cool part about life is that certain levels of operating can't be exposed to us until we take certain steps. And so conceptually, I understand this, but my ability to be able to continue to move forward, or let's say 5 levels from now, isn't even accessible or in my level of comprehension right now until I take the next step in my life of the so that's also very exciting to me, knowing that no matter how advanced or forward thinking that I am, there's always levels of operating and functioning that I'm not even aware of,
Yeah.
that I can't access until I go to whatever the next step is in my life of being able to step fully into that inspiration to follow that scary feeling associated with that next level.
Yeah, yeah. And how many people do you think resist putting themselves in those types of situations or dynamics which actually would stretch them to that next level, but are actually almost afraid of being stretched because it is pushing them outside of their zone of comfort?
Everybody, you do it, I do it. Like, remember, there's always levels to it. And I think the moment that you think that you're no longer a victim to fear per se, or of the known, which what you said earlier, of the potential outcome of the known that could happen, is the moment that you stop moving beyond where you are. And I think part of the fun part about life is constantly understanding that it isn't a perpetual process of evolution. And knowing that I fall short is what keeps me humble in a way to God. And then I think this may be a different tributary of conversation, but this is how I maintain a good relationship with the inspirations that God has for me in my time here on earth, is by understanding all of the ways that I fall short of the inspirations that he plants on my heart. I have so many pieces of awareness of things that I could do if I had the fucking balls to do it. Right? There's always levels to it. Always. Now, I, in my humanness, feel that I have to maybe take a couple steps at a time to get to that big thing. But really, if I had the balls, I would just go do that big thing that is super scary. Right? So it's cool to know that no matter how advanced I get, there's always an element of my psyche that's preserving itself to remain constant in who I have been, which gives me a certain level of excitement knowing that there's always something that can be deeper understood, which is kind of how I am as a person. I just enjoy the process of unraveling and not living in this place of, right, I'm found or not found, or I know the absolute truth or I don't know the absolute truth, but perpetually just being excited about what could be uncovered. And I think that's probably one of the best ways to live life, is that state of just always being in a level of awe and excitement of what I don't know and what could possibly exist in my realm of reality.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that, man. Actually, I think in the description of the podcast, it does say about, I think one of the things, I forget now, obviously I wrote it, but it was me sharing conversations whilst being on the continual journey of being lost to found. And it's actually, not just found it, it's a finding more, finding more, finding more. There's really always more to find. And I'm glad that you mentioned God, so we can add that into the mix in this conversation, because for me and my beloved Colette, we talk about this a lot, and certainly recently, about being open to what is desired of us by God. So not even necessarily what it is that I desire. And actually, the two are kind of the same. If I'm tuning into my deepest heart's desire, I feel like that there is that connection there with the divine. But what is actually desired of me, and where does our attention and intention go based upon that connection and feeling? And I guess I wanted to, so now we mentioned that, what is your, because God's a loaded word for some people. There's the patriarchal, maybe Abrahamic God, which some people, believe in. And for some people, maybe it might have been more discovered through ayahuasca, DMT, and they had an experience of this kind of cosmic, mystical God. Maybe through some people, it was through certain types of meditation or, transcendental experiences. But I'd love to know your relationship, experience, and meaning.
Yeah, so to me, God is limitless and boundless. And if I sit here and try to describe what God is as far as the unique, distinct features associated with him, or I just say him because I don't know really what else to say. It doesn't feel right, so I just say him.
Mm-hmm.
Guy, girl, I don't really know, but I just say him because that's just my vocabulary. So I just say him. But I don't get too wrapped up and concerned with all the details associated with the physical features of what God might look like or the afterlife in that way. I more so see God as a very distinct power source that exists well beyond my comprehension. And I have this incredible ability to be able to tap into it when I'm in a state of receptivity. And sometimes it's incredibly powerful and flowing through me. Sometimes it's not as much. I just know that it's something that I have the capacity to tap into that gives me a unique ability to live an even more fulfilling life that ultimately God has planned for me.
Mm.
So it's pretty, my definition is very simple and basic, but I think it's supposed to be because if I try to understand it too much, then it's just mental masturbation, in my personal opinion.
Yeah, I guess it's the ineffable, and yet there's something kind of fun in I find, trying to take on the task of explaining the unexplainable.
Yeah, and it's also fun too, right? Like it can also add to the human experience associated with believing in that power that exists beyond us. So I'm not sitting here saying anybody's wrong for it, but I think if you get wrapped up too much in thinking that that identity is the end all be all, instead of just seeing it as a fun experience to try to label the unexplainable, then I think you got it a little wrong. So, but I do think because we are human, we do love story, we do love myth, and we do love the idea of a hero and a villain and all those types of things. It adds to the experience of God. But I think it's important to also understand in that same breath that just because we have that element of our humanness that likes that doesn't mean that the way that we like to describe the story means that it's absolute truth.
Yeah, absolutely. I like what you said about when you're in, I can't remember the exact words, but effectively when you are in a space of receiving, that you can have that strong connection. And I'd like to play and flow with that some more because I have this the same experience of life in the sense that I have this this little book over here which I will write in the mornings, and I'll put myself into that place of receiving, and I'll ask for something to come through, and sometimes I'll write 5 to 10 pages where I have zero idea what the next word is that's going to come out, and it often is pretty profound. And interestingly, I just opened January 28th, which the thing that came through was, to receive, one must first be open. So,
Yes.
of course, that would come up. But and interestingly, actually, it's hilarious because this is the thing that I was actually about to reference because you said about receiving, and this is the page I just opened at. The thing that came through, I'll just read a tiny bit out. Asking you shall
Please.
receive. To see the power of this, when asking, one must first be open to the receiving. Many people ask and wonder why they don't receive, but they haven't actually opened themselves energetically. And there's more. There's like when you said that, being in the state of receiving. And that's what came through here, that whole thing of, but you have to actually open yourself to receive first. So I'd love to know more about your experience of that. And when in your life did that start to be, is that something you've always experienced, or is it something in later years that you've had that connection with?
Man. Oof. I don't know. I don't know when. I don't know when. If I always have, if I haven't. because I don't, that's such a difficult topic. I would say becoming consciously aware of it and more of the consciousness associated with it, like the more of the understanding of how all of it works and the science that can explain a lot of this. I would say when my football career ended, I had the opportunity to play professional football, and that got taken from me due to a neck injury that I had. And then I went down a rabbit hole of understanding a lot of the concepts that I had already embodied to get to the NFL. And that's when I started to learn deep about the science behind how all of this works. So I think all of this God stuff that I'm referring to God as can be explained by science. And I went down that rabbit hole probably 7 years ago of actually understanding it. I think I've always had a relatively innate connection to it. But as far as when I really started to understand it, like the difference between having the raw materials of making a new boat compared to actually beginning the process of constructing the boat, right? So like I always had the raw materials that were there, and maybe I'd like put the boat together in a nice way, but never with the details associated with it, like the perfectly integrated parts of the wood that flow together to make the boat look beautiful on the outside. I didn't have the details of. So that's what I would probably describe my relationship with all of this as.
Yeah, that's interesting that it took an event to happen, which then led you down a path of more consciously um, looking at it. I mean, what was that like for you to have the experience of having the opportunity to play in the NFL and then to discover, what you did about your neck? What was that process like?
I mean, it was, it felt like I had the whole world in front of me. Like it was almost like a massive chunk of the pie that got taken. And I was like, I could do anything. It was wild to think that I could do anything. Because for the longest time since I was 10 years old, I was locked into a mindset of, I am going to get to the NFL. And that was all that really existed as far as what was possible for me. So when it got taken, I sat in the expansiveness and the openness of that open space. I was like, oh my gosh, I could fill this in with anything, which is pretty cool. And it felt really exciting and limitless. And the potential was amazing to think about.
And
so my transition wasn't as difficult as most people's transitions between identities. That's why I say I feel that I've had some elements of awareness since I can remember.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really awesome, especially if you were able to receive it in that way. Because I suppose if you've always had your sights set on this one thing, that maybe is kind of like the game of operation, right? There's that narrow parameter. And then when it's that, it can't be this now, it's taken out of my hands, I guess the whole world really, the whole world does open up. But how many people would think they've lost the whole world versus realizing, no, the world has just opened up to me?
Yeah, well, I also had a unique opportunity to get all the way there too, right? So maybe it would be different if I never even had the opportunity, right? So the stage was set, I did it, I made it there, so I can at least rest on the fact that it was completely outside my comprehension and I did technically make it. So maybe it would be different. I don't know. But I do know that the fact that I did make it all the way there did play a role on maybe my capacity to be like, okay, if I just did this, then I can do anything. And so that could have definitely contributed to the moving forward concept of, well, I can do anything that I set my mind to because technically I went and just did that.
A lot of people that would experience that would very much feel like they were a victim of life or circumstance. How would you suggest they navigate something like that where they aren't the victim, where you actually interpreted it as, you now had the whole world open up to you?
Well, they just don't get it. Like, you just don't get how things work. Like, if you think the whole world's ending, like, it's actually very naive. I know it's difficult when we're experiencing a certain level of emotion, right? We're having an identity crisis in that moment because that thing that we found so much security in gets taken from us, then naturally you have nothing else to find security in. That's why it can be very dangerous to find too much security in identities. So if you just are able to separate from the emotion of the experience, you can understand that that is just not fundamentally how life works. Just not how things are. It's just wrong. Like, you're flat out wrong if you think that way.
Yeah, yeah. It seems that it's a perceptual issue, and maybe even more like on
Faulty
the
programming.
ability. Say it again.
It's faulty programming. Just the way that you've been taught to live is wrong. It's just faulty programming.
Can you go into that more?
Yeah, it's just not like thinking that life is over because one chapter is finished just doesn't make any sense. It's like you can actually just turn the page. I know that last chapter was like beautiful and really good, but it's okay. You can just turn the page. But getting too attached to it instead of just enjoying the experience of it is what allows people to not be able just to turn the page and go to the next chapter. So that's where I talk about it, like being able to experience a level of bird's eye view of your own experience allows for more of a fluid transition between chapters. And that doesn't take away from your ability to fully enjoy the experience of it. It actually allows you to enjoy more of it because you're not holding on and trying to squeeze as tight as possible. I gave the example of squeezing the frog too tight that you have in your hand. It's like you have this cute little frog in your hand and you're looking at it and just like, ribbit. You squeeze that thing too tight, then its eyeballs are going to pop out and it's dead. And being able to live above the experience of what we're fully immersed in is what allows for less of the squeezing of the frog and more of, oh, this frog's a little cute frog. And when it's time for me to let go of the frog, I can just be like, oh, there you go, buddy. It's nice to meet you. And then you can move on and go about the next thing that you're doing in your life. So being able to live life through a lens of having more of a bird's eye view while also getting lost in the experience, I think is a superpower that, if known how to tap into and access, leads to so much fun in life because you can fully immerse yourself in the thing without it having to go any type of way. And I think that's the sauce of how to live life to the highest level.
Yeah, it feels to me that if someone is moving through life with a sense of wholeness from within, there can actually be the real enjoyment of all the experiential nature of life. But I think so many people are feeling this inner lack, this emptiness, this lack of attunement, and they're hoping that this thing outside of me is going to be the thing that allows me to feel whole, complete, and fulfilled. So there's so much charge and importance placed on the external experience, environment, and what's happening, that if it gets taken away, life feels like it's crumbling because they were relying that was going to be the thing. I know everything else I thought was going to be wasn't, but this time, this is going to be the thing. And then whether it gets taken away or it's not, there's this like yo-yoing of elation and then like being absolutely distraught when it's not the thing, versus it sounds like what you're saying is, if we're coming from this more place of already feeling complete and whole, we can actually just fully fucking experience all of it for what it is rather than all the meaning we attach to it.
Yes, there's never it goes back to full circle back to what we were talking about in the beginning. There's never a thing. There's never a thing. Now, it doesn't mean that we don't go from thing to thing. I think life is just a series of understanding our inspiration of where we're at right now, fully going after that thing until we can't anymore, and then being able to tune into the next thing that feels inspiring to go after and do. Now, that doesn't mean we don't go after what we want at the highest level. It just means that there's not ever a thing, and it's just the process of how to live a relatively fulfilling life is knowing that you're always going to go from one thing to another. And in the process of going from one thing to another, you can enjoy it a little more, knowing that there's never a thing. There's never a purpose. There's never a thing. There's never a finding of yourself, but a perpetual process of getting lost and getting found over and over and over again. And that's just the game of life. That's just what we do as humans. So if you can understand that conceptually, it can allow for a greater level of letting go of the frog, which allows for things to flow a little more. You're supposed to go get something, and then that thing comes down, and then you go get something else. That's just how life is. So to think that life is somewhat of a going and getting a thing, and that a thing is going to give me everything, it just doesn't. It's just an absence of understanding how everything works. It's just negligence. It's just not knowing how things work.
Do you ever wonder or think about societally why within our like structure that this type of understanding of the nature of life is so missed and not understood?
Well, I think like anything, the value of something comes from the rarity. And I think as like I referred to earlier, like we move up in these levels of understanding of what's possible for ourselves, and I would say more so increasing our increased ability to stay in alignment with our God's purpose for that season. It allows for more power to be accessed. So I really just think based on what actually brings value to things in life is rarity. This information and knowledge is earned through an accumulation of experiences. Like I don't think I'd be able to truly speak on these things if I hadn't earned the right to be able to speak on this knowledge. Now, I know some people talk about things because they learn it in books, but I have a difficult time being able to do that. So just like everything, the reason that most people don't have access is because it wouldn't have value if everybody did. So that's the importance of being able to understand that and understand that this knowledge and this understanding is earned.
The reason I ask is because my good lady and I have been just discussing the idea of what would a reformed education for children look like, where it, throughout the educational process, it also included a rite of passage, which is to your point about it being earned. That's the rite of passage part. But if it was laid into the developmental process woven into education, so it wasn't just about learning academic subjects, but it was also for preparing one to develop this understanding and relationship with life. And so I guess it's why I asked the question, because we're kind of hot on that topic at the minute, just in our own private, and personal life is something that's very much alive for us.
That's a really cool concept because I know that's a really popular thing that people are wanting to do now is integrating a lot of this more widespread information to the masses. And I love the idea of a rite of passage. I think the good majority of civilizations throughout time have had some element of a rite of passage, whether that was the Vikings or the Native Americans. There's always a quest that one had to go on or endure, something they had to endure to be able to receive that next step or next level in life. So I think that would be a really cool concept if you guys were able to create that and have there be something where it's like a final test to some extent, but maybe not a written test like there is in the traditional sense of schooling. I know a lot of different tribes in the Amazon and Native Americans, there was different levels of having to put like wooden rods through their like the skin on their boobs and have to go 3 days out in the wild and survive. Like crazy shit like that. No, that's obviously not something that you could probably get away with today. But there was always a rite of passage that took someone into this level of understanding. I think it's very important to maintain the integrity of. I think it's dangerous to allow it to just be easily accessible without any type of earning it. That's where I think it can get a little dangerous.
Yeah, it feels like I guess a lot of this information is accessible for most people, but they for a lot of people it's information. It doesn't equal transformation, and I think it's not until there's the experiential process where it actually goes from intellectual understanding to lived experience, which is where the transformation occurs. But
yes, and that's where it starts with. It starts with the relationship with God and that unique connection that we have with God, and tapping into that divine inspiration that exists within us through God. And if you can do that, if you can tap into that, you can begin the process of following whatever's there and confronting the feelings associated with what it feels like to follow that thing that you know you're meant to do. Because the thing that you're meant to do, oftentimes, like, or the things I should say that's on your heart by God, can bring up the most insecurity. They can bring up the most uncertainty. Because if we fail that one thing that's on our heart, or those things that are on our heart, that means something about us. Whereas when we fail doing things that aren't of us, that are of what society says that we should want, that are of what our parents say that we should want, that are what we feel we might get some level of validation for, there's nothing on the line. But when you find that thing in this season of life for you that lights your heart up, that maybe other people around you or society would not say is good, it's not easy to do. But doing that over and over and over and over and over and over again is what creates the space to actually fully embody this understanding. At the end of the day, I think the only place to get to is a unique divine inspiration with God and our Creator, and following whatever exists within that. That's what the goal is for me at the end of the day. How deep can I go into not allowing the outside world to control that relationship, or I should say, taint the relationship that I have with that inspiration? The best way I can describe it is, like, God has a designed way for me to bake a cake. And so I'm going about my day and I'm baking my cake, and all of a sudden I get a call from my mom. My mom calls and she's like, "Oh, what are you doing?" I say, "Oh, I'm baking a cake." She's like, "Oh, you should put some sprinkles on it." And I'm like, yeah, that sounds good. Okay. I get out the phone and I'm like, "Oh shit, well, I don't really like sprinkles." Well, but mom said I should put sprinkles on it. Oh, I'll just put a couple on there. Right. And then it's diluted. And then you're like, okay, well, let me keep going. And you're baking the cake again. And all of a sudden your wife comes home and she's like, "Oh, what are you baking?" You're like, "Oh, I'm making a cake." She goes, "What flavor is it?" And you're like, "Oh, it's chocolate." She's like, "Oh, chocolate, it's okay, but it's a little too much sometimes. Like, maybe you should put some vanilla in it to balance that out." And you're like, "Oh, well, but I wanted to bake a chocolate cake." You're like, "Well, maybe she's right. Maybe I could do that." And you add a little vanilla into it, not really wanting to, though. And so I think that's what life is. Life's being able to look at, like, I would say, like, shit tests of the world and be like, okay, well, I hear all of you. I hear all of that. Okay, but this is where I'm at. This is what I want. This is what I'm creating, because this is what my Creator has designed for me to do. But that's very difficult. To say, "Hey, mom, like, I hear you and appreciate what you're saying, but I don't like sprinkles. Thank you." To hear wife and to have her say what she says, be like, "Hey, I appreciate what you're saying, but I'm making a chocolate cake." And that's the hardest part. And the better we can get at being able to do that, the more clear that vision can get over the long run, and the more capacity we have to find deeper levels of fulfillment that exist within us, because our connection with our Creator is so profound.
I love that, man. It really speaks to, I guess, a term that. Are you familiar with Dr. Mark Gaffney?
I think I've heard of him, but I wouldn't know, like, any of his work or
Yeah. So
concepts from him.
one of the things that he's maybe most known for is his work on unique self. Your Unique Self is one of his books. That was one of his big books, and he really talks about just the uniqueness of the individual. And really what he does is he bridges two things together. He'll say Western Enlightenment is about the individual, and it's about the dignity of the individual, and that's really separate self. And then in the East, they say, no, that's not accurate. You're not a separate self. You're actually part of the whole. You're part of the field of consciousness, and that's your true self. And then what Mark's thing was, well, beyond that, there's unique self, which is the recognition that you are a unique expression of the divine, of God, of that. You are a unique expression of that creation of God. And how do we bridge those two things together, where we are connected to the field, connected to God, and still be able to celebrate and recognize our uniqueness, and that each one of us are an instrument in the orchestra of, like, the universe, and he calls it the unique self symphony. And we all have our own individual sound that we're meant to play, but we all end up like, again, the general school system, everyone's being made to play the same notes. And it's just a monotone. It's the sound of when the heart stops beating. What do we get on the machine?
Yes.
It's like almost like that deadness because we've abandoned our uniqueness. And just when you were describing that, then it really kind of pointed to that. And how often do we go through life where you get to whatever age and you go, I've got a fucking cake here that I really am not enjoying. And then it's like, okay, what? And you don't even remember what ingredients you put in. And then you've got to almost start going, well, how do I take out the vanilla? And hang on a minute, sprinkles. I don't fucking like sprinkles. And there's almost this undoing that needs to take place to actually find out.
It's unlearning. That's it. Yes. And that's part of the process, is stripping back the layers.
Yeah.
And that's one of the, I would say, most difficult parts about it, because you're then doing things like you're going through the pain associated with ripping your cake apart. It's no longer this beautiful cake or this cake that somewhat looks good, but you're like pulling it apart and you're trying to deconstruct it. And that deconstruction process can be a little messy. It can feel wrong, right? Like you're like, oh shit, like what would it mean to my mom if I pulled out these sprinkles? Or what would it mean to my wife if I just said, no, I'm not, like I'm removing this vanilla from the cake in its entirety, right? So then you have to go through the process of that, which is a whole thing in and of itself. I saw you smiling about that. Like, what did that bring up in you?
I think just the nature of that is probably most people's life, really, is just how much of the ingredients in their cake is not theirs, is not theirs. I mean, I could think of how much of my life previously was in a certain direction and path, and really kind of following the path that is very much laid out, especially for there's a general idea of what it may be for a man to move towards, which would be the pinnacle of like a desired life. There's a general feeling of what that is within Western culture. And, I was very much kind of doing that stuff throughout my 20s. I was very much on that. And then you start to create a sense of identity out of that. We have these desires. Some were certainly my desires that were born out of insecurity and a lack of unworthiness. So I had these desires which were really to move me. Here's where I was, and I wasn't okay with that. So I wanted to try and go as far away from that as let me get over here. So there's that. So that was the desire. Then there's the desires that society tells us these things are desirable. And, we start to go through that. And for me, I really went hard at a lot of those things throughout my 20s. I'd competed in bodybuilding. I had my first supercar in my mid-20s. And I was doing that stuff. And then really I would say it wasn't until I got to, 28, I guess maybe a little earlier than some people go through it. I went through like the dark night of the soul, really. And then that led me to like plant medicines. And the first time I did ayahuasca was then. And then started to really reestablish my relationship with life itself. And that was maybe 8 years ago. And then you have to go through this undoing process of like how much of these things weren't my allurements. They were never my desires. Letting go. But even then, you think you let go, then they just subtly show up because it's so familiar. And it subtly shows up and you have to almost notice and go, no, that's not mine. It's not even mine. Not that. Yes. I don't want the sprinkles. Fuck off. And then, and then being comfortable with what the flavor is, for me, and I have a pretty weird life in many ways for most people. And at one time I was a bit like, how do I talk about this openly? How do I talk about like channeled writing or, some of the things that I were into, or even like 8 years ago, ayahuasca was way less known than what it is now. It's a lot more popular now, but talking about those things, it was like, oh, will I get ashamed about this? And now, it's finding myself at a point in my life where, especially because I'm in a relationship with someone that is really quite similar, and it's like, well, we fully see and accept each other. So then outside of that, outside of my relationship with God and my beloved and then my children. It's like, well, outside of that, it's like, if I can be myself with them, there's a leap of faith that has to happen to be yourself with the rest of the world. And for most people, there's this feeling of, am I going to get rejected? But the wild thing is that you just find the people that are into that and resonate. And all of a sudden it's like, oh my God, I can actually be myself and be received and be held and be celebrated. And most people, it's sad because they never get to experience that. They never get to experience actually just being who they are, talking about the weird and wild shit, because we've all got weird and wild shit, but we don't celebrate it. But when we do, and we're forthcoming about it, we then meet other people that are like, oh, you too.
Yes. And here's the thing, though, too, is like being yourself isn't even personal. And I'll go a little deeper into that because this can help take away a little bit of the tenseness. And this is me speaking to myself as well, because there's obviously levels within myself that I hold back on because of this. But who I'm uniquely, divinely inspired to be right now is not personal. It's planted in me by God. It's not personal. So it's me just getting out of the way and allowing for me to be a conduit to the inspiration that exists. So if I'm showing up in a certain way on social media, it's not me being myself. Okay, it's not me being myself. It's just allowing me to express what's existing through me and getting out of the way. And so as time goes on, I think what happens with a lot of people is they because they show up in a certain way on social media for an extended period of time, they feel like they have to maintain integrity to that way of being. But that doesn't make any fucking sense, because that was never you. It was just a unique way that God was shining through you in that season. And as all things will come to an end. So now as that shifts, making it less personal, right? You being that way before, being yourself then, was never actually yourself. It was just a unique expression of God that was coming through you. And as you continue to move through life, it's just that. It's always that. So I think that takes away a little bit of the pressure off, because I think people hear that and it's like, well, fuck, I have to be myself. Well, what does it mean to be myself? Well, it's just however you feel divinely inspired to express yourself in that moment. Mm-hmm. That's it. That is yourself. There is no identity that you are attached to. It just is that moment's expression. That's it. That's it. That's it. And being able to detach from this idea of, well, how do I be myself? Can help with the letting go a little bit more.
Yeah.
Now, that's a very, really out there esoteric concept. Maybe people will go right over their fucking heads, go, woo, but it's the truth.
It really is. It's when we realize that, the idea of myself is the identification with my thoughts and beliefs. I identify with those things. I think those things are me. And that's all it is. It's like the idea of who I think I am. And it feels like this is the power of humility. Because in humility, the ability, if you're being expressed in a certain way today, and in a month's time you're saying something different, and someone says, well, hang on a minute, last month you said this, and you went, yeah, I know. I think differently now.
Yes, absolutely. And that, I talk about this all the time. It's a superpower. I think Ralph Waldo Emerson, he mentioned something about this concept, and I kind of took it and ran with it. But it's a superpower being able to be incredibly passionate about what you feel like is true right now, and also at the same time be willing and open in the next breath to change it. That's a superpower. I think a lot of people won't let themselves speak out because maybe they're afraid that they'll contradict themselves later down the road, or they might not believe what they believe right now. But nobody ever should think or operate in that way. Our thoughts always should be evolving, so we can understand that that's an inevitable part of life, and it can take away the tension of not being passionate about what I know right now. So me expressing the way that I am right now and all the certainty that I am, it doesn't mean that I'm married to any of the concepts or ideas that come out of my mouth. I'm not. I'm open and willing to all of them being wrong. Now, there's certain beliefs and understandings that I have that continually stick around, and that's why I can consistently talk about them. But I'm also willing and open for all of them to be shattered tomorrow. So it's a superpower for me to be here, being passionate about what I'm saying, while also being willing to say, well, I'm also open to those being wrong tomorrow.
Yeah, it's It really is a superpower, and it just feels like humility is the thing that's required in that,
Yeah,
because
you have to
it feels
die.
like the ego is it grips onto us. Like,
Die.
oh no, yeah,
Be willing to die in every moment, man. Like that's so much of the power of it. That's a maybe generalized thought, but that's really what it is. It's like being willing to go to the cross in every moment, die to be reborn over and over again. And we could dive into this a little bit. It's the concept I'm playing around with a lot in regard to Christ going and dying on the cross and the resurrection. I believe I've never heard anybody say this before, honestly. But I believe it's a metaphor for this process that I take people through in my coaching, which is being willing to bear the cross of who you have been, go die and deny that programming and kill it off, sit in the discomfort associated with the dying off of who you have been, and then to be reborn and resurrected again as a more advanced version of yourself. But keep in mind, just because you're resurrected into a more advanced version of yourself doesn't mean you don't go to the cross again. And that's part of life. So if you can understand that that's the flow and nature of how life works, then maybe it won't make you going and dying on the cross as difficult next time.
I love that you say this, brother, because right before you did, I was about to say it, and it's
Incredible.
actually part of the reason that this journal is there's a cross on there, and you're right. I haven't heard people talk about this, but Colette and I, we talk about this even within our relationship. What elements of our relationship do we need to allow to die so we can resurrect? And it's not just a resurrection to where it was. What is the deeper story? It's the willingness to die, and actually, the reason was love. Right,
Yes.
it was it was the love for humanity. So when the reason is love, allow this to die from a place of love. There's then a resurrection, and it's not just to the same place; it's to a transcendent heavenly realm. And I just freaking love that you say it, because we talk about this so frequently within our relationship. Well, where in our lives do we need to allow to die? And there's been so many times in here I've written about bearing the cross, like what is the cross you're willing to die on, and to allow. And it really for me, it feels so much like the ego. And Colette was away for 5 weeks. She's actually from the States. She moved over here and she was back in the States for 5 weeks. And in that process, before she went away, we were having like a little bit of we were kind of having to navigate some things that were coming up. And really what we both came to the awareness is that the issues that were arising were purely things that we had to let die in ourselves, because ultimately they were lies.
Would you be willing to share? Do you feel comfortable sharing what those are, as far as like the part of you that you felt like had to die?
Yeah, part of it was actually just some of the beliefs that I had around how I thought the nature of a relationship should be. And it was narrow. It was that game of operation in certain aspects. And it's just because that was always my view on like how relationship looks, and not being able to expand to this possibility of like, well, what does it mean to be infinite in a relationship? What does it mean to be infinite in a relationship? Now, in this, it might sound like I'm talking about polyamory. I'm not. I'm more around like even location wise, us in travel, of us being in devoted, sacred union, and having the expansion to be either one of us could be anywhere, fully in trust in the love that we have for each other. Whereas my view before was kind of like, in a long-term relationship, proximity is kind of close and you're around each other, and just these ideas that I never really questioned them. I never questioned them. And there was an incredible liberation that took place when I realized, oh yeah, that was just a belief that wasn't even mine. It wasn't even my belief. It's just a belief that I'd kind of picked up. And then was I willing to allow that to die, to expand into something greater that could hold the potential for us being global? But then ironically, what comes out of that was more closeness. It's like what you said about the holding the frog, right? It's like squeezing the fucker to death? Or is it just
Yeah.
like, just holding it like this? And it's like when you're holding it like this, it wants to hang around more.
It feels more comfortable being around you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So cool. A thing that I'm going through in my life right now is I grew up with a family, and most people would be like, "Oh, it's such a blessing," and it is. It's an incredible thing to be able to see for myself growing up. But my mom and dad were and still are the happiest couple, besides my aunt and uncles and my grandparents as well, that I've seen to this day.
Mm.
I grew up in a place in the Midwest where traditional values are very concrete. And so I also have a lot of positive associations with just meeting a person young that you're in love with and getting married and living with that person the rest of your life. And so for a long time, I felt like that is what I needed to do or had to do. And for the sake of a greater cause, I would say, like you mentioned earlier, I had to give myself permission to let go of that concept entirely. So I'm like, I'm not my parents. I had an amazing experience of seeing that type of relationship that most people have no concept of seeing in their life. And I'm also not my parents. So what would it look like to not have a relationship like that? What would it look like to have a relationship that exists beyond the dynamics that they have? And so I had to give myself permission to be able to explore beyond that space and what that would look like. And now, keep in mind, we go back to the cake example. Just because I found that, okay, the sprinkles aren't what I want in this season, right? I don't like the sprinkles, doesn't mean that I won't be open to the sprinkles 5 years from now, right? It's just important for me to get really clear about what are the ingredients I want in my cake right now. And I know right now I actually don't resonate with the sprinkles. I don't. But as time goes on, as you know, our flavors change, our taste buds change. Certain events happen that impact the way that we see things. And so naturally, I could inevitably come back to wanting sprinkles. I think that's one of the hardest parts about the process of unlearning or removing the parts of the cake that aren't us, is not creating negative associations with those things, right? Can I be in the tension of knowing that I don't want the sprinkles right now and I don't want the vanilla right now, while also putting them up on the shelf and saying, well, you know what? There could be a future season where I do want that. Because how often does that happen with people where they rebel against the identity or the way of living that they had growing up, and they create a negative narrative surrounding those things, which then prevents the inspiration potentially that wants to come back around to come back around. So can you be in the tension of saying, well, I don't want sprinkles right now, but know that maybe in the future I might want sprinkles, and not develop a negative association with the sprinkles?
Yeah, I love that, man. It's kind of like not throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
That's it. That's exactly it.
Yeah, man.
So you might not be cool with the dynamic that you have right now or the way that you're living right now, but can you be open to being integrous with what truly is inspiring for you right now in your relationship, while also being open to the way you're doing it right now, potentially being something that you could come back around to, right? It also takes a little bit of the pressure off it as well, I think, right? It's not like, oh, we're good doing this, then now we're doing this, and because we're doing this now, we can't ever go back to this. It just means that right now, this is the flavors that we like. And we'll explore what that looks like right now.
Yeah, and just being open to the unfolding.
Yeah. But that can be a very difficult thing, I think, for many people, because oftentimes for us to move beyond who we've been, there's a level of demonization of our past self or those ways of being that we have to do, right? It's like, fuck dad, or like, fuck mom, or like, fuck that way of being. But it's like, what if I could just be open to saying, well, that isn't what I want. Okay, I want this.
Yeah.
It can be difficult, though.
Yeah. Brother, thank you so much for coming on. I've really enjoyed this, and I really hope we can do more of these, because I feel like we could flow through some really great topics. For people listening and that are interested in you and your coaching, where's the best place for them to find you?
Instagram. Instagram's the best spot. Find me there. Don't go anywhere else. Go right to Instagram. Official Keyen. I'm sure Sabri will put the spelling of that in the show notes. But that's the only spot, Instagram.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Thanks again for being here. I'll get all the links on there, and I hope we can do it again.
Yeah, this was incredible. Thank you for facilitating such an open, expansive conversation. Because I don't actually don't think I've been on a podcast before that we've gone this deep into concepts and played this deep in that space. And I always love being able to go there because I don't even know sometimes how deep I can go unless someone that I'm with gives the space permission for that part of me to be able to be experienced. So it's a testament to you in where you're at in your life to open and unlock a lot of the information that we spoke about today. So thank you for facilitating such a great conversation.
Hey, I love that, brother. There's nothing like having a good dance partner, so we'll do it again for sure.
Cool. Look forward to it.